Hello and welcome to another A Tippling the Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. I'm super excited and honoured to be joined by a guest who I'll introduce in a minute, Dr. Darrel Ray, who was an author, written a couple of books to do with religion, as well as other books to do with psychology. He's an organisational psychologist by trade, but is also the founder of Recovering from Religion. But I will let him introduce himself in a minute. In the meantime, just as people are coming online and as adverts might be showing, so just to waste a bit of 30 seconds, I'm going to spam you with, as you can see, I'm very festive at the moment. It's Christmas time, and I'm secular, but we can all celebrate the winter solstice, Saturnalia, Christmas, whatever you want to call it. I have a book on the Nativity called The Nativity, a critical examination that looks critically at the claims, the historical and theological claims within the Bible about the Nativity, the birth of Jesus. So that is very topical. You might want to grab it. Someone wrote on YouTube today that he's halfway through it and said it's such a super well researched book. He's loving it. Well, brilliant. You can see if he's right or wrong by grabbing yourself a copy. Go and check that out. It's a Nativity, a critical examination. Anyway, it's just topical. I thought I'd do that. Right. Without any further ado, let me introduce my esteemed guest and add him to the stream. Dr. Darrel Ray, thank you so much for coming on.
I'm looking forward to this, Johnny. Glad to be here.
Excellent stuff. Well, I've given you something of an introduction. How would you say it differently?
That's pretty good. I guess if you want to know all the gory details, you can look at my wiki page. I would say that my early career was organizational psych, and I have 2 books there. And then my later career is in psychology, religion. I have 2 books there. So that's kind of the
we'll get to talk about that, and particularly the God virus, which I think it's always one of those books that strikes me as intuitively the case. But we get onto that. So just to give people a sense of where you've come from, because you ended up being so heavily involved in helping people to recover from religious experiences that they've had throughout their lives. So were you someone who was born and brought up in a religious environment?
I was born in I would say, moderately fundamentalist family. My grandparents, especially on my dad's side, were very fundamentalist. So yeah, from the day I was born, we were in church 3 times a week, usually. I was in Sunday school. I went to youth group. I sang in the choir. In fact, that was my favorite thing about church, is music and singing in the choir. And I was a tenor soloist for many years, off and on, for several different churches as I was growing up, and even into early adulthood before I cut the string altogether, so to speak. So yeah, I was my grandfather on my dad's side was a country church pastor, minister for 45 years. My grandfather on my mother's side was a church elder and chairman of the board for most of his life. My dad was an elder. My parents became missionaries when they retired. I have a number of relatives that have been or are missionaries in other countries, and yeah, there's a lot of religion in my family.
So and it's such a different thing in the UK to the US, right? So there are these you've got the Bible Belt and these big religious communities in America that we just don't really experience. We have a very Church of England religiosity. There is more fundamentalism coming in, and we'll talk about that a little bit to do with your experience of that. So it's very interesting that it seems that so many Americans are born into this whole setup that is so difficult to extricate themselves from.
Yeah, it is. And I'm from Kansas City. I'm from the Kansas City area, and I used to live in Wichita, Kansas, southern, a bit more religious down the southern part of the state, but also very religious, of course, in the southern part of the United States. And once you realize how all-encompassing the religion is in some of these communities, you literally can't have a friend for more than 5 minutes before they ask you, what church do you go to? I mean, that's like one of the first questions people will ask you. And I mean, it's actually kind of offensive to somebody from New York, but it's just the normal way you do things in Birmingham, Alabama, or even in Oklahoma and southern states, Texas.
Yeah, but in the UK, I mean, it's just that would never be, because the default assumption is you probably don't go to church in the UK. Right. So like that would be a weird question to ask. Yeah. So I remember watching an interview of yours where you were saying that you ended up being quite a liberal Christian. I don't know whether you always were, but you ended up becoming one at least. And you were in Sunday school, or when you were preaching, maybe in church. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were talking about evolution, although you said you were never invited back to speak twice.
Yeah, that's true.
but so I'm interested in what. Were you always like that? Were you always an inquisitive mind? Why did you accept these things where so many other fundamentalists may not have?
Yeah, I was. I was that troublesome child that always asked why, and my mother got irritated, and she got tired of answering all my questions. My dad wouldn't talk about that kind of stuff, so I never got to ask him why too much. He was a good father. Don't get me wrong. I had good parents. They're well-meaning, raised me well, had good values, irrespective of their religion. But I never bought the party line. At 12 years old, I loved evolution. And when I went up to the top of a mesa in New Mexico and found a whole vial full of shark's teeth, I came down from the mountain, from the flat top mountain, the mesa, and showed them to my mom and my aunt. And I said, "Look, Aunt Margie and Mom, how did these shark's teeth get clear up there?" And my aunt said, "Well, God put them there in the flood."
Classic.
And I thought to myself, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about." But at 12 years old, I was already My grandfather knew I was reading books about evolution when I was 15 and 16. He thought it was scandalous, but nobody interfered with me. Nobody told me I was going to hell. None of that stuff. So that's why I say I was in a moderately fundamentalist.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They were fundamentalist in the sense that, yeah, the Bible's right and you should follow that, but we're not going to interfere with your intellectual development. And as a result, I was very dedicated to helping people. And my approach to helping people was to teach Sunday school or to preach sermons. And I actually did that. I became a Sunday school teacher. I started a bus ministry where we would go out and pick up kids from the projects and bring them into church. I did a lot of things. I was very much into the church, but it was always a liberal thing. When I went to the projects, I was bringing kids in to the church because they didn't have any parents that would bring them in. When I started the gym program in our church, I looked at our gymnasium and I thought, we have this gorgeous gymnasium with this almost brand new church and nobody's using it. Let's use it for the benefit of the local kids. So I talked the board of the church into paying me, small hourly salary to open the gym up 3 days a week. And that way children could come play, That was just my mental set. I find this really,
I find this really interesting because actually I've done a lot of talking on this recently, where it appears that, and there's evidence to support this now. I keep talking about things like church shopping, where people go to a church, and if it doesn't agree with their politics, they will just find another church that does agree with their politics. And it seems like political psychology and moral psychology is more fundamental than religious belief. So it's like you've got your moral compass and your political compass,
right?
That upon which your religious belief is founded, and you don't adapt that to your religious belief, but you actually adapt your religious belief to your fundamental moral and political belief. Is that something you would agree with?
Oh, yeah, it sure would be. And this notion of church shopping is foreign to most people on the planet, except the United States. I will never forget. We had some Belgium friends that came to live in the United States for a year, and it's a long story, but we were kind of their official sponsors when they came here. They're a nice family, still in touch with them, still love them and interact with them. But they moved into this neighborhood, and the neighbors next door were fundamentalists, and they moved in about the same time. And they were talking one day, and the fundamentalists told them, we're church shopping to here in Leavenworth, Kansas, to find out which church we want to go to. And our Belgian friends were Catholic, and they said, I've never heard of church shopping. We just go to the parish. You don't have to shop if you're a Catholic.
Go to your local Catholic church, job done. Yeah.
No need for that as a Catholic. They're all the same. So yeah. Yeah, so it's crazy. But I think you're right.
Yeah. No, it is odd because people think that their religious belief often is the most fundamental aspect to them, but actually it arguably isn't. What were these first seeds? So let's forward one to you. leaving religion? What caused that? What were your first seeds of doubts? How did that happen?
Well, there were two seeds of doubt that I can, in retrospect, I can tell they were seeds of doubt. At the time, I probably didn't know, but one was sexuality. I was, while I was in a fairly fundamentalist family, and they still believed in things like no, you shouldn't masturbate or look at pornography, and you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage. They pretty much violated all those rules, and I know they did because I've got evidence. I have evidence that my grandmother, who condemned everybody else for having sex out of marriage, was having sex before she got married, and my dad was born remarkably early. Anyway, yeah, so it was that hypocrisy. It started grating on the cognitive dissonance of here's the way they're talking, and yet I know different of these people. I love them, and I understand. In retrospect, I understand even more the shame that my grandmother went through for having gotten pregnant before she was married, and so much shame that she never admitted she was married the first time. She left my real grandfather when my dad was less than 10 months old, and moved in with another man. And this is 1930 time frame. My dad was born in 1929. So here, my grandmother is married to a man named Thompson. She has sex with him before they're married. She has a baby. Within 10 months after that, she's living with another man. And we got to, these days, with the DNA and the 23andMe and all that, there's a lot, you can really research shit now. You can really get into it. And what we found was, number one, my grandmother didn't get divorced from my real grandfather for 12 years. We can only find the divorce papers 12 years after they got married. Well, she was living with my adopted grandfather, if you will, for 10 years. And wow. There is no marriage certificate. They lived together for about 60 years before she died, and they refused to allow us to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, and they would never tell us why. And they're long since dead, but the funny thing is now we know why. They never got married.
Yeah.
And
wow.
he was preaching for 45 years from the pulpit about sinful behavior, and he was like doing it himself.
Fascinating. And
Yeah.
and this kind of behavior, I mean, that's just human behavior, right? And for me, as a secular, and for you now, no doubt, Darrel, is you look at that kind of behavior and go, yeah, whatever. I mean, it's morally neutral, whatever. If you don't want to get married and you want to have sex and you do this and whatever, it really makes no difference. But of course, for people in those kind of fundamentalist religious setups, it's deeply problematic, and therefore that behavior is very hypocritical, and then it makes a mockery of their belief systems.
Right.
So that was the one aspect. Sorry.
I would say there were three things. You asked the question. Number one was sex.
Yeah.
And sexuality. And number two was civil rights, because I was growing up in the 60s and I could see the social injustice that was rampant in our society. And my grandmother always told me, they're saying the song, Jesus Loves the Little Children. Well, she herself was about as racist as you could get. So that was another thing that started tipping the scales, if you will. And so, as the longer I went in my training, I also, and then the third thing, of course, is evolution. And my academic training, my undergraduate was in sociology and anthropology.
Right.
Now, anthropology will screw up a religious brain because you're looking at all sorts of cultures and their religious practices and rituals. And so those three things all were seeds planted, around the time I was 12 to 18 years old, and they just kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger until, the whole thing fell apart. There's just no need for it.
So when it fell apart, did you, because obviously with the work you're involved in now with recovering from religion, did you have any challenges leaving religion? How was that experience for you?
Well, I did, but I want to be honest with your audience. I did not suffer. I don't have near the trauma or any of the trauma that I see in so many of the clients to come to us and recover from religion. I think sexually, my sexuality suffered. I had homophobic ideas. For example, I was still ashamed that I masturbated. We had sex outside of marriage. My then wife and I had an abortion, and there was some shame around that. So yeah, there was some stuff going on there, but we largely got over it, and I got over it for sure. It was just took years of rethinking and retraining. And I was in a marriage, and in an extended family that was all religious. It's really hard to make the final break until I got divorced after 17 years of marriage and two great kids. And I was just spent half the weekend with my ex-wife at a wrestling match for my grandson. So we're still on good speaking terms. But that did not break until I got divorced. The thing that really cut the cord was getting divorced, because then I did not have to go to church with her. And
Right.
she always wanted to go to church somewhere, even though she was very liberal too. In fact, she goes to the second most liberal church in the metro area right now. So she was really liberal, but she still wanted to go to church. And I really didn't. But, to keep peace in the family. And I kind of like teaching Sunday school. I was teaching evolution in Sunday school. So I was getting away with shit. I was
You were sabotage.
I was, when we went to this Presbyterian church in Leavenworth, Kansas. We moved there. I was about 29 years old, and they immediately put me. I never joined the church, but they immediately put me to work as a Sunday school teacher for the adult, because I told them, I like teaching, and I could teach Sunday school. So I got the job. They were getting 2 or 3 people showing up for that Sunday school every Sunday. Within a month, I had standing room only. It had to give us a different room, because I was getting 30, 40 people in a room made for 20. So eventually I get this room that could seat 100, and I'd be filling it with, or getting 50 people easily in the room. And it was just, I was bringing interesting things. I was talking about what are the synoptic gospels, and what's the problem with the synoptic gospels, and, what's the problem with the nativity? I mean, I actually did a whole series on that, but the one that I got the most attendance was comparative religions. And every Sunday I would bring another person in and talk about, but they would almost always be like an ex-Mormon or, whatever. But I brought in an ex-Sikh, I brought an ex-Mormon, ex-Hindu. So all these people are coming in to hear about other religions. And it was eye-opening to them. And I was having a blast.
But then there's so many of these people who live in those, social, familial contexts are effectively living in cocoons, so that they just don't hear this stuff. You hear this so often. It's like, well, I had these doubts, but I thought it was on my own. I thought I was the only person in the world. And it's like, they're so, it just seems unfathomable that they would think that. But these cocoons are so like all consuming that when someone comes in and says, here's some things you might not have heard about, then I could imagine that would be super interesting.
Yeah. That led to me getting preaching gigs as a substitute minister. Ministers in the area would take a vacation. They need somebody back them up. So I would go in and preach. And that was where I would preach one sermon one Sunday, and I would never get invited back, because I could read a whole sermon and hardly mention Jesus. And they didn't like that at all.
No.
It's got to be Jesus this and Jesus that.
So yeah. Did you have any problem with your own family? They are, as you've said, you mentioned that they were missionaries or training to be missionaries, or certainly fundamentalist and ensconced in the church society. Did they give you any jip for leaving religion?
Well, I was the oldest in my family. I'm by far the best educated in any component of my family. I'm not necessarily the smartest, but we got some pretty damn smart people in my family. But the whole missionary side of my family pretty much put me at arm's length. I tried to keep track of them and keep touch with them, but they never condemned me. They just gave me the hint, we don't really need you around. We don't want you asking too many questions or saying anything out loud. So, yeah, that was a problem. With my daughter, I raised her very secular, and so did my wife, or at least very religiously liberal. but she's very conservative. She's always been conservative. Personality is 50% genetic, and so
Yeah.
she was born with that conservative personality, just like her grandparents and great grandparents that I knew. I can see that personality characteristic in her. It's genetic. This whole nature nurture thing kind of irritates me. But anyway, that's a whole nother lecture we can do.
Well, I did a talk last week on free will, because my first book was on whether we have libertarian free will or not. But the idea is nature or nurture. Well, it's both. It's your nature as it interacts with the environment that you're nurturing. So therefore, yeah, as you say, 50% in this case, 50% genetically determined, but then it's how that interacts with the environment. And you could, as I suppose, as liberal parents, mitigate some of that conservative religiosity or this conservative like dimension to her, but at the end of the day, it's still there.
Yeah, right. And whatever excuse me, whatever culture you're quote swimming in, the conservative personality is going to absorb the traditions and the conservative components of that culture. If my daughter had been born in Germany or in Italy, she would be a conservative Italian or a conservative German. She might not be religious at all, but she'd be conservative. That's for sure. And so within my own immediate children and family, we just don't talk religion. We have a treaty, I guess you could say. We have a wonderful, loving relationship. We just don't talk religion. She doesn't tell me anything, and I don't tell her. Now, she knows I've written all these books. She knows I go out and talk, and but for example, I mean, I keep her up to date on where I'm going, but we just don't talk about why are you going to Australia? Oh, I'm just going on a speaking tour. We're not going to say why what I'm speaking about.
So yeah, that's really interesting. So you possibly didn't suffer so much, I guess, heartache or problem from leaving religion, because people are pretty good at compartmentalizing, which is to say, I don't know, I'm asking you actually, is it that some of your family members are like, okay, we recognize you've rejected everything we stand for, but rather than have this become a really big issue whereby we are arguing about this all the time, or you are the big black sheep and you're some terrible human being, it's like, let's just compartmentalize that, put that in a box, lock it up, and then we'll just talk about other things.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way it was. I think within my family and social circle, it's hard to say it's hard to disown the black sheep when the black sheep is the best educated, the oldest grandchild and the oldest child in the family, most successful. There's a lot of things that add up here and say, wait a minute, that's not the kind of black sheep that you normally hear about. I did have two brothers that were black sheep, and they were alcoholics, and one of them died of meth addiction. Okay, that's a black sheep. So what do you do with Darrel? I don't know what to do with this guy. And I think that's what happened. And I was one of the two primary caregivers for my brother. My mother and father before they died. So I'm an atheist. I'm an out atheist. I told my mother, it's kind of a funny story. I was divorced from my first wife, and I was dating. And I told my mom I found this really great gal. I'm dating her and really enjoying her. And my mom says, well, I hope she's a good Christian girl. And I said, Mom, if she's a Christian girl, I'm running as fast as I can. And that's when I came out to her as an atheist. That was 1990 or so, or 1991. Wow. But my mom never gave me any trouble about it. We had a great relationship with my parents. They did their thing. I did my thing. They even lived on my property. They had a motorhome. They'd come here and spend 3 months every summer for several years. It was just a good relationship. Yeah.
I remember you mentioned in one of your interviews that is it Madeline O'Hare?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So if you could explain to the viewers in a second who she is and how important she is in the atheist community in the US. But you talked about your granny saying that talking about well, as long as
I could tell that.
At least the devil believes.
So Madeline Murray O'Hare was the founder of American Atheists, which is a viable, very thriving organization now. I've been a member of it for years. Anyway, in 1963, when the United States Supreme Court came out saying prayer is illegal in the schools, public prayer, forced prayer, and I was a victim of that. From the time I was like first grade, we were reading from the Bible. And we were having a public prayer in the classrooms when I was in elementary school. So I knew what this is all about. And in 1963, Supreme Court says you can't do that anymore. My grandmother just thinks that's the most horrible thing. And Madalyn Murray O'Hair was the reason, or, the main focus of that whole Supreme Court, one of the focal points of the Supreme Court. So every time my granny would hear Madalyn, the name Madalyn Murray O'Hair on the radio or TV, she would say, "That woman's worse than the devil." As a result, I was curious. I want to know, how can anybody be worse than the devil? Because they'd always preached to me that the devil's the worst thing on the planet or in the universe. Finally, you had to be careful about Granny, because if you crossed her or contradicted her or questioned her, she'd get the switch and switch you. You get a good spanking for having contradicted her. So I was careful, and it took me about 3 months to finally say, "Well, Granny, how can anybody be worse than the devil?" And she said, "Well, at least the devil believes in God." So that was her theology. It was,
but that's fascinating, and I think it explains so much, because there are so many fundamentalist types in the world who will say, well, who will literally think, well, the very worst trait of a human being, like, you can talk about murder, you can talk about this, you can talk about that, but the very worst trait is to not believe in God. And if that's what you believe, then this then goes on to explain organizations like Recovering from Religion. So because if you have like these communities of people who think the very worst human beings on earth are those who say they don't believe in God, so then you're in that community, right? You're thinking, well, I don't believe in God, but if I say this to any of these people, I am worse than a pedophile, I'm worse than a murderer, I'm worse than any type of criminal, I'm worse than the devil. No wonder you have this stigma with leaving religion.
Yeah. And it becomes imprinted on the brains of people if they've been exposed to this very early on for year after year, month after month, Sunday after Sunday. You are the worst person on the planet if you're an atheist. And it's hard to get rid of that. That's why I think, while maybe 30% in the United States and close to 50% of the people in the United Kingdom would identify themselves as nuns, N-O-N-E, not affiliated with any religion, they still won't say they're an atheist, because it has a stigma to it. And that's a big problem, because it makes the atheist world invisible. If we're only 2 or 3% of the population, which is what the Pew survey seems to indicate, we can ignore that. But we're not 2 or 3%. We're probably 12% of the population. Those other 9% simply can't open their mouths and admit it. It's just impossible, because they feel the stigma, and they don't want to feel that stigma socially in their families or in their neighborhoods or in social circles. You can leave a job. You can lose jobs, at least in the United States. You can lose your job. You can lose relationship with people instantly just by coming out as an atheist. I am an example of that. I had, as an organizational psychologist, great clients in the corporate world, for clients that had been my clients for 20 years. Now, if you know anything about consulting world, you usually go in, you do your thing, you leave, they never hear from you again. But in my consulting world, where I did consulting, I had clients that asked me back for 20 years, over and over and over again. If you are a successful consultant, if people keep using you over and over and over again, that's unusual. But after 20 years of having some of my clients, the minute I wrote The God Virus and I came out as a public atheist, private atheist, okay, we can deal with you, but not a public atheist, I lost about 80% of my clients overnight. I mean, within 6 months, those clients were gone. They wouldn't answer my emails or phone. Now I'm the same person, same skills, same guy that wrote those books, but many of these people were evangelical Christians in the human resource department of Blue Cross Blue Shield or General Electric or Cummins Diesel Engine. I mean, these were clients of mine that knew me very well. I can't tell you how well we knew each other after 20 years, but
yeah.
Don't be a public atheist.
I lost I lost a job as a teacher for being a public atheist. But that's something. Yeah, we have religious schools in the UK, and it's slightly different because we're not secular, even though we're not as religious. But yeah, I fell foul of that. But there you go. I'm not supposed to talk about that. But anyway, can I just say thank you so much to my esteemed member Chindi Chimbalu, who is a legend, loving, good guy. So he's a liberal Christian, but he says Dr. Ray is right about Christian hypocrisy on sexuality, as I have seen this. So in his experience as being a liberal Christian in the US, so I think there are statistics that show a large percentage of people in the Bible Belt watch porn.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you know about that, because just to let people know, your second book, or do you want to give the people the title of your second book?
Yeah, well, right next to my, well, you can't see it, can you? There we go. Right next to my dildo here, I have my book, Sex and God, in which I actually write about where is the highest porn watching percentage. And it comes from, in the United States anyway, 2 states. Utah, where all the Mormons are, and Mississippi, where all the fundamentalist Christians are, or many of them. So yeah, that's been a tradition that's been going on for as long as the internet's been around. Every piece of research on Pornhub, or there's other research. There's a book written about 10 years ago called A Billion Wicked Thoughts that documents that same phenomena. I mean, down to the zip code practically.
Is it down to the fact that it's the taboo element, the fact that if you try and constrain people from doing things, you say don't do that, people are more likely to want to do it. There's this kind of element that if you make it wrong or bad to do that, then it inspires people to want to try that out.
I call it the red elephant phenomena. I want your listeners to do exactly what I'm going to tell you now. Don't think of a red elephant. And what religion does is say sex is bad. If you do it, if you think about it, you're bad. And there's just this constant theme over and over and over again daily of your body is your enemy. Sex is the most terrible thing you can think of. Well, that's the red elephant. You know, the minute I said, don't think of a red elephant, your brain popped a red elephant there. And religion is constantly reminding you, don't do these. Well, your natural biological urges, you're going to do it. There's almost nobody on the planet is going to not have sexual thoughts or engage in masturbation or want to have sex outside of marriage. I mean, just everybody. So what they've got you is trapped. You're going to do it anyway, and then you're going to feel guilty about it. In my book, The God Virus, I write about the guilt cycle. And the guilt cycle simply says, we're going to teach you how terrible you are, and that the only place you can get relief is from the church. So you masturbate or you look at porn, or both probably, and then you feel guilty about it. So you have to come back to the church to confess your sins, read your Bible, go to Sunday school or whatever to get relief. And then the cycle starts again, because 12 hours later, you're back doing it again.
That's really interesting. So it kind of hooks you in, because it's saying you're going to do these things. It's the kind of knowledge you've got to do these things anyway. So it's really bad to do those things, but we can make you feel better about doing those things.
Right.
So you come here and then you go away, or you better not do those things, knowing full well they're going to do those things. And then they come back to you, and that cycle continues. Yeah.
It's I don't quote Richard Nixon often, but I'm old enough to remember who the asshole was. And he had a famous saying. He said this to Henry Kissinger one day, I guess. He said, if you've got to buy the balls, the hearts and minds will follow. And that's what religion does. It grabs you by your own sexuality and then tells you that's how terrible your body is, and that your main enemy on this planet is your own body. That is like the most bizarre psychological message you can give somebody.
Yeah.
And that comes from, as a philosopher, it comes from early dualistic thinking, Platonic. I'm talking to the guy that should know better than me.
Well,
but we're not a mind and a body. We're an integrated,
Yeah, and this is where things like evolution is super important to understand, which is like the functional aspects of our behavior. Like, we have these for a reason. And then you start getting to these bigger discussions about, well, why would God design us to have these functional kind of outlets or functional needs that we do these things, and then that's morally bad? Surely
Yeah, right.
it just doesn't make any sense. So
I
yeah.
want to highlight something I just saw in your chat with Cindy saying that the most porn being watched is on Sunday. No, it's surprising that most porn is not on Sunday, but here's the deal. Porn use goes down on Sunday mornings. Why? I guess you're in church, right? But if you're in a religious part of the country, if you're a religious person, you make up for it through the other 6 days. Religious people watch more porn than secular people do. They just don't watch more on Sunday.
Interesting.
It's really funny. There's again quite a bit of research on this.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
As Ricky says, Ricky is another member. Thank you so much. Same. He says, my family doesn't know what to do with me. So he's talking about like compartmentalizing or how to deal with someone who's like the black sheep. They're used to believing that people only leave for worldly pleasures, but he didn't do that. I left because of the things I found problematic with the religion. So he was thinking critically about the religion from a sort of philosophical or kind of biblical issue point of view, and left because of that. And obviously they're used to people leaving, because they want to be bad and, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Well, Ricky, I totally agree with your family. I left for totally for worldly pleasures. That's why I left. I mean, I want to masturbate if I want to. I want to have sex outside of marriage if I want, and I want to read whatever book I want, because I get a lot of pleasure out of reading books. So that was the thing that scandalized my family the most, was I was reading books that I shouldn't be reading. Right. And of course, most of my family will never read my books at all, Sex and God and the God Virus, because they're scandalous, they're prohibited subjects.
Indeed. So, so this then brings us on to, so you've left religion now. What explains the journey, or what was the journey between you leaving religion and then becoming super interested in the trauma involved in other people leaving religion, even if it's not necessarily your own experience?
Well, I'm a psychologist by training. I started out as a counseling psychologist, became a clinical psychologist. Then I went to organizational psychology for a few decades, and now I'm back. You never lose those skills. You might lose them. You don't lose the skills. They may become rusty anyway. It matters not. The fact is, I know my profession, and I've watched people, I've interacted with people, I've seen patterns throughout my career. And I read early on, I was reading Bertrand Russell, for example. Really loved his Why I'm Not a Christian book. I'm sure you probably read it.
I haven't actually, but it is one I should do. Yeah.
Oh, I highly recommend it. And then, of course, I read Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, Dennett. I read them all. And at the end of that series of books that came out in the early 2000s, it hit me that I love all these books, but not one of them explains the psychology of religion. Not one of them does. Now, Harris is a neuropsychologist. Yeah, okay, but he's not a clinical psychologist. And he's not dealing with clients every day in his office. I had that experience, and I thought somebody needs to write that book. So I'm the somebody. And it actually came quite easily. Once I sat down and started writing it, it was done in 6 months. I mean, it's really all the research, everything. When I decide to write a book, I do it fast. Because I've been writing in my head for 5 years. That's generally what happens. So I published The God Virus in 2009. And a few months into that, I start getting people, I want help. I need help. I want to talk to you. I can't possibly help everybody who needs help. I just, quite ignorantly, I did not realize how big a need there was. I was simply trying to say, hey, here's the psychology that you're experiencing. And I realized after just a few months that there's a lot going on here. So I announced on meetup.com that I'm going to have a meeting at the back room of a local IHOP restaurant here in town. And 11 people show up to this meeting, and it's just a meeting to talk about recovering from religion. 11 people show up, and I only know one of them. And at the end of about 2 or 3 hours, I only asked two questions. It said, how did religion hurt you? And how did you benefit from leaving? And I have people crying and pouring out their souls and sharing their stories. And I'm just blown away. I mean, I'm a good facilitator. I've done group therapy. I know how to do all this stuff. But that meeting took me by surprise. At the end of the meeting, I'm thinking, I've got a tiger by the tail. I need to do something more than just hold a darn meeting. And that were April of 2009 was the genesis of the organization, Recovery from Religion. Now, it took us 3 or 4 years to really get things going and get incorporated and build our programs. But it was an eye-opening thing. And the more I did it, Johnny, the more I did this, the more I realized the need was out there. It's like we're all blind. I liken it just to another phenomenon. When I was growing up, I didn't know any gay people. When I was growing up, there were no lesbians in my school. I mean, they weren't there. And now in retrospect, I look back and, well, hell, there was a lot of LGBTQ kids in my high school. I just couldn't see them. They had to remain hidden. And that's what we're seeing now. Once you identify something, put a name to it that people can understand and kind of hang their hat on, then they start coming out. And that's what's happening. We're seeing this literally globe-wide need for people to recover from the indoctrination they got, whether they're a Hindu, a Muslim, a Mormon, a Christian, it doesn't matter. Every religion has a direct impact on people's lives and mental development.
And actually, I wanted to speak to you a bit, but we'll come to this a bit later, between the difference of experience you've had with your recovering from religion in the American context compared to your expansion worldwide, and whether there are different challenges that you have there. But just before that, let's go back to your early experiences and in the American scenario. So you then obviously realized, okay, I need to do something more. So you founded Recovering from Religion, which, well, you tell us what is the purpose of Recovering from Religion? What's its mission statement, if you like?
To provide hope, healing, and support for those dealing with issues of doubt and non-belief. That's our mission statement. Hope, healing, and support for those dealing with issues of doubt and non-belief. Yep.
So what would you say are the biggest, traditionally in America, say, are the biggest challenges that people have in leaving religion, and both the journey through into non-belief, but then, because I suppose there are different things going on here, right? And you can talk to this, which is the challenges of actually extricating yourself from a religious society and community, where you say, right, okay, I need to punch through this. But then when you get to the other side, you have different challenges, which is, now I'm out, I have holes of things that I used to do and used to feel that I can no longer do and feel. So I have different challenges. Can you speak to a little bit to that?
Yeah. So leaving any religion, it really doesn't matter what religion, even the most liberal religions sometimes do this. But there are 3 components that we see. This I'm going to name the top 3, because they are all consuming. That's hell, fear of hell, fear of disrupted or severed relationships, and sex and sexuality. If you put any of those 3 into any conversation you have with a religious person, I'll guarantee you probably 2 of those 3, if not all 3, are a part of their recovery journey. It's a tough thing when you've been raised all your life to believe that LGBTQ people are going to hell. Okay, you got 2 things going on here. I'm gay, or my sister's gay, or whatever, and they're going to hell, or I'm going to hell. So you not only have your own sexuality to deal with, you have to deal with this trauma of fear that comes from hell. And we all know that children, for example, are sometimes traumatized by things. The notion of a monster living under their bed or in their closet. That's a pretty common fear for children. But what if you're telling that children the devil lives under your bed? That and the parents believe it themselves. I mean, the parents don't believe the monster's living under your bed or your closet, but the parents do believe the devil is living in your heart or whatever. So you get this, it's a double whammy. It's almost like you can't have less than 2 of these things I just named: hell, relationships, or sex. Now, the relationships part of it comes usually in adolescence at earliest, and certainly in adulthood when people are trying to leave religion, because they're still unable to separate themselves and find new community. So after people leave, the big complaint or concern is building new relationships and social isolation. Now, the research, and the Christians love to show this research. The research shows that people who are actively involved in religion have higher happiness. Well, that's true of people who are actively engaged in secular society as well. If I go to a secular meeting once a week, I'm probably just as happy as the guy who goes to a Baptist church every week. So the issue is social isolation, and people who are socially
Carry on.
isolated.
I'm just looking for a book.
Okay. People who are socially isolated are far more prone to depression because, that's how we maintain our mental balance, is through our connections with other humans. We're such an incredibly social species. We need other humans. So to leave a religion, they'll say, well, it's because you don't believe in Jesus anymore, or you don't believe in Allah anymore. That's why you're depressed. No, you're depressed because you lost your entire social network and nobody's there to support you. And so we are really interested in Recovery from Religion, to help people find new communities, build new communities. We even have internal communities that people listening to this podcast could go to our chat line and they could join our online communities. So you can hear from other people who are going through exactly the same thing you are.
Yeah, and I was looking for a book called The Non-Religious, which is by Phil Zuckerman, one of my writing colleagues at Only Sky, Luke Galen and Pasquale. So it's an absolutely phenomenal book looking at the sociology and psychology of religion. Really is one of the, it's just research, just a whole bunch of research on all aspects, whether non-religious people are more or less moral, more or less politically inclined this way, that, all the different aspects. But happiness is a really fascinating area because actually you're absolutely right. The devil's in the detail, and there's lots of self-selection biases, which are people like, oh, well, I say I'm 9 out of 10 happy because that's what I'm expected to say, and I'm religious, so I should be happy. So you get the self-selection bias, but then you get all sorts of things which are compounding variables, such as, it turns out that the really important component of that is whether you are part of the norm or part of an extensive social network. So, for example, if you ask the happiness question in secular countries like the Nordic countries, then the non-religious are more happy because actually they're the ones in the norm in communities of non-religiousness, whereas and so on and so forth. So, but I couldn't find the book, unfortunately. So,
I love Phil Zuckerman's work. He and I have never crossed paths. I've never got to meet him, but he's an amazing researcher. I really enjoy what he's done. He shed a lot of light. So here's the way I look at it. People like Phil Zuckerman have shed a lot of light on the academic questions. And I look at us as the flip side of that. We're taking those questions and applying psychology to them. So here's the psychology of recovering from religion. And to that end, we train people. We train our volunteers and we train psychotherapists as well to try and help people through this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if people want to check out Phil Zuckerman, I have interviewed him before, so you can check out some of my earlier stuff. So you talk about the two aspects, the journey through into non-religion, and then when you're there. I wonder how much difference you're seeing now, because when you started this 2009, the internet was finding its feet. It was a thing. It was a major part of our lives. But like even 13 years later, it is now an integral part of all our lives. So the ease now with which people can find communities, alternate communities like the non-religious community, or people that believe the same as them, even if it's not the norm, the internet facilitates that. Have you found? What are your thoughts on how the internet has impacted the work you're involved in?
We couldn't exist without the internet. There would be no recovery from religion without the internet. At the same time, the internet is like, a hammer. You can use it to hammer a nail, or you can hammer somebody's head. It's a agnostic tool, I guess you could say. except that the algorithms oftentimes feed you what the algorithms think you should have. And so people, they need a way to find community. And if you go and make a search, just random search, you're probably going to find more churches or a more liberal church or somebody who's Mormons trying to bring you to their church. And so the internet, we've had people said, I've searched everywhere. I can't find a good community until they find us. And then when they find us, we have the tools to dig deep down and find what they need. And I mean, it takes a little skill. And the other thing is when people search, even if they do find recoveringfromreligion.org, they don't know what we are. We could be another religion we could be a cult, trying to pull you into the new cult with this fancy name, Recovering from Religion. So we do have people contacting us, say, are you guys just a religion? Or, they're a little weary of it, leery of us. They're not sure if they want to reveal anything to us. But we work hard to make people feel comfortable and to reveal what they need to talk to us about. And then we will help them find the resources they need. So yes, the internet is a good thing. We couldn't exist without it. But as with all things, user beware. You could be, we could be a cult.
Yeah. You're right, because you can find anything you want on the internet. If you want to believe in a flat Earth, then you can go out and find a flat Earth community. Yeah. But I guess the idea is that say 25 years ago, when you were leaving religion in America, say, and you're in the middle of the Bible Belt, you're on your own, because without the internet, there's literally, you're physically isolated and therefore intellectually isolated, arguably, culturally isolated, socially isolated. And whereas now there is an outlet that even if it's like at midnight when your family's gone to bed and you're on the internet, you can find things.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to go to the library, and let's say 1990, you'd have to go to the library and you would have to spend hour after hour after hour looking for resources. And even then you might not know what to look for or where to look for. Now you can. But here's the thing, even now it's still dangerous. There are countries where you could get your head chopped off for talking to us. We have people from Saudi Arabia or from Pakistan, from Bangladesh who contact us. And we have to be very firm with them and say, you have to get a VPN before you talk to us, period. Don't say another word. Get a VPN before you talk to us. And sometimes we get some pushback. Oh, no, I don't have to do that or whatever. No, we will not talk to you if you don't have a VPN. Because it is physically dangerous. Atheists have been murdered. Many atheists have been murdered in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So we have to be extremely careful of that. At the same time, we get a lot of people contacting us from the closet. Literally, 15-year-old kids go in their closet, get on their phone and talk to us, chat with us. I can't let my parents talk to you, and I have to erase my history after I talk to you, because they're still living at home. They're financially dependent. They don't believe any of the stuff their parents are telling them, but they have to keep pretending. And it's
that must
scary.
be a very different skill set that you have to have as your workers and your volunteers must have to support someone like that, and you have to be really careful compared to some professional adult who's in a very different situation.
Well, there's a wide range of issues that we face. It's not just that. I mean, we could have a 35-year-old person chatting in with us who's suicidal. I'm going to hell, I might as well kill myself. Yeah, we get those occasionally. We get people that say, I'm having suicidal thoughts, but I do not want to call the suicide hotline because they are religious and they'll tell me I need to pray more or something bullshit like that.
Right.
So what we do is we train our volunteers very carefully in something you'll be quite familiar with, and that is Socratic method. To use street epistemology or Socratic methods. And we train them very carefully. We supervise them very carefully. And, the skill sets develop. I am quite surprised at how fast people develop these skills once they get through our training program and actually interacting with people using the skill set. People can learn these skills pretty fast. They just have to be, willing to go through.
I've been on coaching courses myself. So for those who don't know, Socrates was famous for winning philosophical arguments merely by asking questions to his opponent, and those questions were sort of leading questions that would then illustrate how his opponent didn't know what they're talking about or were wrong in particular areas. So the Socratic method or Socratic dialectic or the coaching, it's known as coaching now in modern terminology, is like talking with people, helping people to come up with their own sort of solutions to their own problems just by delving into their situation by using very clever questioning or thoughtful questioning, and therefore it's not so much that you are just imparting your knowledge onto them and look, I'm telling you what to do, but it's like together we're going through this, but actually you're coming up with a solution to your own problem. So would that be fair enough?
It is, and it's so much more satisfying from our side of the equation to simply ask questions and facilitate somebody else using their own brain. I mean, they come to us, and the first thing a lot of people want to know is that if I'm an agent answering a chat or a call, the client says, "What religion were you, or did you suffer from religion?" And I will not tell them, or I'll rarely tell them anything about myself. My job is to keep the focus on you, to help you think through your stuff, because giving advice from my perspective to a stranger I can't even see, for example, or hear, is ridiculous. You need to use your own brain, and we're going to help you use your own brain. That's our attitude here. In fact, if a volunteer wants to give advice, we're going to jump in and say, nope, that's not what we do. We will intervene quickly for a volunteer that is giving advice. That's not our job.
I remember speaking to Gail Jordan. For those who don't know, Gail Jordan is also involved in recovering from religion. I interviewed her probably a month or so ago now. I can't quite remember, but fairly recently. And she was saying that, and in fact, on a live chat with someone who had done this, and she was saying that one of the great joys of doing the work that you do is you get people who come it goes full circle where they come to you for help and they end up going through this whole journey, recovering from religion, and then becoming volunteers to help other people. Is that something that gives you particular pride?
Oh, we love that one. I mean, it doesn't happen super often, but no. a good number. I don't know what percentage, but probably well over half of all our volunteers come to us from after having used our services as a client, and that's just so rewarding. And it's why we exist. People, a lot of people volunteer for us for their own reasons, and I'm okay with that. They're for selfish reasons. I mean, all of us have problems. All of us are trying to work through our problems, and if you want to use recovery from religion as a way for you to work through your own problems, as long as you follow our training program, we don't care. You follow our training program, you ask the questions, you help other people. And if you get helped in the process, that's just an added benefit, a bonus. So many of our volunteers say this is more therapeutic for me than it is for the clients. And I'm sure that's true.
So what's been an indication of your success in America before we talk about the different challenges you had, or people face in religions abroad, and the difference in Christianity abroad to what it is maybe in America? What are the indications that you guys done a really good job in the US?
Well, first of all, we seem to be reaching far more people. And our number of chats and our number of phone calls have steadily grown over the years. As the word gets out, as I talk to people like you on podcasts, word gets out, we get more callers and more chatters. Second is we get more volunteers. We have a steady stream of volunteers. We always need more, don't get me wrong, but we've got a steady stream of volunteers coming in. And I think the skills, our skills have increased in how to train those volunteers. If you'd come to us 5 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been as skilled at getting you up to speed. So that's all an indication. Our secular therapy project is a great example of our growth, our development. We started out with 24 secular therapists back in 2012. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more later. But now we're up to literally 699 therapists. I checked last night, with over 31,000 clients having registered with us. Now that is, if you I don't know if I can share my screen. I could show you the data. The data is just amazing. The just graph just goes up, up, up.
Well, the great, I mean, my good friend Dr. Caleb Lack was involved in secular therapy, and he's a good friend of mine, love him. But he and I've interviewed him on secular therapy previously. But just to explain to the viewers, and you can take this on. But secular therapy is providing people. It doesn't have to be about leaving religion or anything, but it's providing people with psychological help from someone who is secular, as in they're not going to use their psychological support that they're giving you as a way of delivering their own kind of religious worldview and poisoning their kind of support that they're giving with their own religiosity. Is that fair enough?
That is. And actually, I started the Secular Therapy Project in 2012, and I was able to hand it over to Dr. Lack. He took over as I guess you could say the second director of the Secular Therapy Project, and he kept it for about 5 years. He really, and when you go to the Secular Therapy Project and you use that service, about 80% of that was under his supervision. You know, he really made it work much better than when I had it. I mean, I had it 1.0, he had 2.0. We just finished 3.0. Literally last week, the announcement was, there's some, and the 3.0 was our ability to provide very detailed search functions for internationally. It used to be you couldn't search easily if you were a client in South Africa looking for a therapist, but now you can. So that was that's been since Caleb Lack we have implemented that. But up until that time, Caleb had done incredible work for us, and he's just an amazing human being, good friend of mine. Really glad we found him.
He's such a decent guy. I was just trying to find one of my interviews with him to show you where we talked about the Secular Therapy Project, but I couldn't find it.
I think I watched that.
You watched? Yeah, I was looking for a written piece though as well. But the chat I had with him. So that's the secular therapy. Now, and we mentioned several times about you expanding abroad. So the recovering from religion is, and you've talked in previous interviews I've seen about the expansion to New Zealand, to Australia, and no doubt many other places. What's different about other countries to what happens in the US? Are there any significant differences, or is it just an exportable model that works and everyone's experiences that they go through in the US are broadly paralleled elsewhere?
Well, I guess it's exportable. Literally, we have a Romanian volunteer. This is an agent that went through our training. He's a great chat line agent, but he was doing a chat with a child, or I guess you could say they're 18, I think, still living with their family in the Netherlands. So he's chatting through our system to somebody in the Netherlands, and the chat worked beautifully. He resolved resolve shouldn't be the word I use. He gave the person the resources they were looking for and needed, helped them explore some of their emotional conflicts, help them understand the value of a secular therapist. He did all this in about an hour of chatting with this person. But he's from Romania, chatting with somebody in the Netherlands. One of our top chat line agents lives in Sydney, Australia.
Yeah.
And he's taking chats. I don't know why, but he took a chat at 4 a.m. the other day. And I don't mean 4 a.m. the client's time. It was 4 a.m. his time. So sometimes I'm blown away by our volunteers and how dedicated they are to helping people. So it is exportable, and for this very reason, the same reason we talked about it earlier, Johnny. There's Socratic questioning is not culturally specific, I don't think, and that's if you train people to listen. We train people to listen very carefully and respond to the client's expressed needs until and then we give them a few questions, approaches. And then what you realize is once you gain rapport with the client, once they trust you, once they know you're not trying to deconvert them or reconvert them, they let their hair down, they tell you what's really bothering them, then we can really get the resources they need to them, and they can move on their way. They may never need us again. That would be a success in my estimation.
And I know you said that all religions are broadly you got the same problems, but I wonder if there are particular differences maybe between Islam and Christianity, because obviously the way that some of us understand fundamentalist Islam, and we've talked about existential threat to life by coming out in Islamic countries that you won't experience elsewhere necessarily. Are there challenges that you can talk to with regard to Islam compared to Christianity?
Oh, yeah, maybe I didn't want to misspeak on that. Not all religions are the same.
Oh yeah,
Some are more toxic than others. That's unquestionable. I mean, you're not going to get your head chopped off at a Unitarian church, but you might in Saudi Arabia at a mosque. So no, those things are true. What you mentioned, there is a definitely a qualitative difference between almost any Christian religion and Islam, but we only have to go back 400 years to realize people were getting burned at the stake and had their head chopped off in the religious environment of Europe during the 30 Years' War. So yeah, or even bigger than that. I'm sorry, not the 30 Years' War. Throughout the 1500s, when they had the witch burning phenomena, 250,000 people got burned at the stake, mostly women. So, yeah, Christianity is not as bad as it used to be, and Islam is more like what Christianity was 400 years ago. Now, yes, there is a difference. We have to go some extra mile to train our volunteers how to talk with those kinds of religions, but specifically Islam, because it's not just Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, Bangladesh. It's the United Kingdom. It's Canada. Yeah. Yeah. We get people chatting with us. For example, a girl chatted with us about a year ago from Canada, basically saying, my dad might kill me if he finds out I don't believe religion anymore. Oh, and I'm dating a Christian boy. We had a girl from northern India who was raised Muslim. Now, it's India, but she was raised Muslim. And now she wants to convert to her boyfriend's Christian religion. Now, it sounds weird, but they're living in India. She's a Muslim. She wants to convert to a Christian. Now, that's an interesting problem. And we probably talked to her 3 or 4 times about strategies and resources and organizations. Where can you go? Another thing we get is asylum seekers. People, I'm an atheist in Bangladesh. What do I do? How do I get out of this country? Now, we don't do asylum stuff. We don't do that kind of stuff. But we can help you find the group that will do that or does do that. Whether they will or not is another question. So we're a clearinghouse for a wide range of problems from a wide range of religions. And our volunteers, thankfully, keep their head neutral. They try to keep their head agnostic, if you will, with respect to which religion. I mean, I can make an argument that Islam is the most violent religion on the planet. I can make that argument. I would be wrong, because Hinduism is pretty damn violent to women in general. And there's probably as many women killed in India from honor killings as there are in any Muslim country. So it's irrespective of religion. It's just there. And we are here to help you find the resources to deal with whatever it is.
And that's a huge responsibility for your volunteers, and I'm sure you well understand this, which is that they have the future, these very vulnerable people in their hands, coming to you because they can't see anyone else to go to. They see no other options. Yep. Not that you're the last port of call, but maybe you're the only port of call, and that's a very great responsibility. Do some of your volunteers struggle with that, or do they, is this what inspires them? Or
that's an interesting observation and question. And yes, we have that exact problem. Some of our volunteers, for example, we had without going to any confidentiality, we had a client contact us who was in imminent danger, and we were able to work through it and help them find some help, immediate help, so that we don't, once we finish, we don't know what happened. We know that they got the help they needed. That was a year ago. I don't know where they are, what their situation is now. They haven't called us back. But yeah, that was really triggering, or maybe triggering might be the word, I don't know, to a couple of our volunteers. So we have this system in place. We've had it in place for 8 years, that if a volunteer is triggered or otherwise disturbed by a chat or a phone call, then they can contact one of the leadership and we can plug them in to 2 free sessions of psychotherapy within hours. Yeah. We have a set of about a half a dozen secular therapists who belong to the Secular Therapy Project. So we know they're good. We know they're vetted. And we could turn them over to one of those people and they get 2 free sessions. We pay full price to the secular therapist as an organization because we just want to make sure mental health is one of the most important things that we focus on with our volunteers. Yeah. If you're not mentally healthy, if you don't feel confident, if you don't have the emotional, don't volunteer if you don't have the emotional energy.
Yeah, because you bring your baggage, don't you, to all of your interactions, and if you're bringing those problems to a scenario where you're trying to alleviate someone else's problems, then things can be difficult. I was wondering. Oh, sorry, carry on.
Well, just so that's an example of where the Secular Therapy Project supports recovery from religion. The two are parts of the same organization, and they support each other in those ways. Yeah.
Brilliant. So Carrie Ann Chrysler says, many people I know who have deconverted are having the problem of telling their parents. I don't know if she works with children. She can probably illuminate us here. So is this something that recovering from religion offers help in?
Yes, we absolutely offer a ton of help in that. Remember I said relationships. Well, usually by the end of adolescence, people are starting to individuate. They're pulling away from their family of origin and becoming their own person. But there's a lot of religious organizations, Jehovah's Witness comes to mind right off the bat, that literally do not want children to individuate, because once you individuate, then you're going to probably leave Jehovah's Witnesses. You'll see it's a bunch of bullshit. So there's a lot of infantilization that parents create infants out of their children forever. And that is mentally unhealthy for people. We need to become our own adults. And we get a lot of people we get 35-year-old adults calling in and say, I can't tell my mother, and yet I have to, or I need to, or whatever. We have books, we have videos, we have YouTubes, we have a lot of resources that recover from religion for helping people even make the decision. We have a decision-making flow chart that it's should I come out or not? Because if the danger outweighs the benefits, then you might want to stay hidden if you're in Bangladesh, that sort of thing. Yes, we help a lot of people. I'm going to put a percentage of maybe 15 to 20% of all of our callers and chatters are dealing with that very issue. As adult children, I'm 35 years old and I still haven't told my parents, or I'm 18 years old. If I tell my parents, they will throw me out of the house. We have an online chat, an online community you can join, but you have to come to us first. It's not, you can't search it and find it on the internet. It's totally private, but you can come in and you can talk about these very issues with other people who are dealing with that same issue. So if somebody's interested and they just want to talk to somebody that's going through the same thing, and it's different. I mean, Jehovah's Witness children deal with it. It's probably different than a Baptist to some degree, or a Catholic. So if you want to talk to other Catholics or other Baptists, we're the place to come. You'll be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, so someone in my chat is a former Jehovah's Witness. I've got a former Lestadian, which I didn't even know about until I interviewed him. And so there are all different flavors that come to these issues with their own slightly different issues they might be having. So yeah, horses for courses. If what would be your sort of top couple of bits of advice to someone who was leaving religion or struggling with leaving religion, or thinking about leaving religion? Aside from obviously get in touch with the RFR, but what would be some generalized advice you think is really important, or is that too simplistic?
Well, first advice is be aware you are not alone. There are lots of people going through the same thing you are. And when you go to church next Sunday morning, or you go to the mosque, or you go to the cathedral, wherever you go, or are being forced to go, you can look next to you, at the people on the same pew or row that you are, or people behind you or in front of you, and you can be guaranteed 1 out of 10 of those people are having the same issue you are. The other
Is there a stat on that?
Oh, I don't know I don't know if there's a stat on it, but if you scratch below the surface too far, you're going to find people have got questions that aren't getting answered, and it bugs them and bugs them. Now, I'm not saying everybody get this, but I don't think it's too far out to realize that 10% of the people in that church don't believe what that minister's saying. In fact, that's probably conservative. If the preacher gets up there and preaches whatever sermon he's going to preach, and it's almost always a he, of course, and you've read the same Bible they've read, their interpretation of it could be quite a bit different than the one you're going to. And that alone, that creates cognitive dissonance. There's anywhere you see cognitive dissonance in a church is an opportunity for people to widen that gap, because it forces people to ask questions. The minister said this as he read that. I don't think that's what that verse says in the Bible. Now, the other 9 people haven't come to the point of questioning it, but the one person has. No, I don't have any data on it, except how many people of the 30% of nuns, quote nuns, or 50% of nuns in the United Kingdom, how many of those people still attend some kind of religious service? I'm positive they're there, because we get the phone calls. We have people chatting, texting on their phone from the Sunday school,
really,
from the church service. It's just, we know people are sitting in church asking questions. Now, you can never ask a minister a question. You can have people on your chat right here ask me a question, and it could be controversial. I'm going to answer the question. But if I'm a minister, you can't answer that question, especially if the question is, well, I don't see what you're saying in this Bible here, and here's my sources. Where are your sources? The whole nativity scene, for example, get up and give a sermon on the nativity. And I said, well, I don't think the guy was ever existed. I don't think that question's going to get answered.
Oh, I'd love to stand up and give a nativity talk in church.
I'd love to ask the question: do you think God raped Mary? Is that or was Joseph's best friend? I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, don't get me started. Stay on target. Yes, stay on target. So Dale McKenzie says, my dad died before I left religion, but I decided not to tell my mum because she was elderly and I didn't want her to spend her final years worrying that her baby boy was going to hell. And this is quite an interesting switching of the dynamic here, which is to say, it's not so much that I'm worried about my own feelings or the kind of psychological harm on me. I'm all right. Maybe it may be that I've left religion and I'm fine, but actually it's the impact of me leaving religion that will have on other people in my life. And that's a different thing to consider. Is that something that people speak to you about?
I think Mackenzie is right on target. There's nothing wrong with protecting other people. I'll tell you, Mackenzie, I did the same thing. I was writing my book, The God Virus, which you can see right behind me. I got the manuscript finished and I showed it to my brother and we talked, and my mother was literally on her deathbed. She died within a few months of this book coming out. And my brother and I talked and we both agreed, I'm not going to tell her I'm writing this book. My mother was very proud of me for all the other books I'd written, but this book would have probably made her die 3 months earlier. So I didn't tell her. There's nothing wrong with that. Whether you tell the whole truth or only a partial truth. In this sense, I was telling a partial truth or withholding a truth. Truth is not the final answer. The relationship. We oftentimes, if somebody asks you, does this, if your spouse asks you, does this look good on me? And they love it. And you say, no, I think you look bad in that. Are you going to say that or are you not? You have to make the choice. Am I going to be honest or not? Not everything in the world has to be said. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, the History of Lying with Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, it's a brilliant. Actually, I love when he comes out with the 10 Commandments in the tablet. Yeah, it's really good.
I would encourage your viewers to watch that movie because it really does. What if everybody was totally honest? I mean, the whole first half of the movie is everybody being totally honest. And wow, It's too true. What's going on in your head needs to stay there in many cases.
Yeah. There is a reason we don't speak honestly like all the time.
But let me go a little deeper on that, because I think it's an important point. What I've got in my head is only my perceptions. It's not the truth. And I have learned a long time ago, literally decades ago, that what I'm perceiving and thinking in my head, had I opened my mouth and said it, would have been devastating to the other person, perhaps. And, oh, by the way, it turned out it wasn't right in the first place. And that's why we tell our volunteers, never give advice, never try to delve into other people's lives in inappropriate ways, because you will almost always be wrong. As a psychologist, I've had hundreds of clients in my office. I can't tell you how, in just a few sessions, I'm pretty damn sure I know what the problem is here.
Yeah.
Only to find out 2 weeks later, I was totally wrong.
Yeah.
So we are really good at thinking we have the answer when we don't have a clue. So it's not like you're lying. It's that I'm still exploring. I need to keep my mouth shut until I really got a better handle on reality. And most of us don't have that kind of handle on reality.
This is where, so you're saying like, we really would rather not give you advice, like you should do this, but it's like, let's talk about this. You come up with ideas about what you should do through this Socratic dialectic. And then you walk away with this thinking you have worked out your own plan of action. And I've helped you. I've facilitated you coming up with that yourself, but I haven't told you what you should do. Is that fair?
Absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah. I just wanted to a couple of things. I just want to say thank you very much to Daniel Moore. Just want to say thanks both of you for your hard work this year. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and I really appreciate your support for the channel. Super cool. And of course, well, Darrel, what has been a success for you this year in terms of recovering from religion, or the work you're doing?
We have seen a huge increase in our number of volunteers. Our, like I said earlier, 699 therapists is really means a lot more people are getting good secular psychotherapy and mental health services. But what's happening next year is what's got me excited. We literally had our most recent meeting a couple of days ago with Sherry D'Souza, one of our board members, and we're going to Australia. Gail and I will be in Australia for 3 weeks, doing a speaking and book tour kind of a thing to raise awareness for recovery from religion. And we're hoping, we're working hard, Sherry is more than us, at developing an entire legal structure, or not legal structure, a registered corporation of recovery from religion as a branch, I guess you could say, of recovery from religion in Australia, which will help expand throughout Australia. There's a lot of fundamentalists everywhere. Don't be fooled. Sweden may be very, very secular, but there's still Jehovah's Witnesses there. There's still Mormons there. There's still fundamentalist Baptists in some places in Norway. We get the calls. And when the first fundamentalist call we got from Norway, or chat, I watched it and I thought, I've always thought Norway is really secular, but no, they've got some cults in that. So we need more and more exposure internationally. I think we're doing pretty darn well in North America, but we're moving towards opening up a lot more in South America. We've got some Spanish language skills volunteers. And so
I guess that's quite an interesting place, because there's that whole Catholic heritage in South America, but at the same time you've got, it seems like, a new generation coming through, where you've got changes in abortion legislation in Argentina, I think it is, recently, and you've got this growing kind of movement towards possibly secularization, or at least non-secularization or non-religiosity, that I think South America is an interesting place.
Well, the problem with South America, and it's happening big time in Brazil, is the Pentecostals are taking over the place.
Yeah.
They're leaving Catholicism and becoming variations of Pentecost. I mean, Bolsonaro, the president of
Bolsonaro,
Bolsonaro, I never pronounced it. He's leaving, or hopefully he'll leave. He won't be a Trump and try to stick around. But he's a fundamentalist evangelical Pentecostal himself. So it's infecting that culture in a big way. And when you look at the favelas, the lowest class, the most impoverished areas, that's where religion spreads like wildfire. The more impoverished and less educated an area is, the easier it is for religions to spread.
Well,
And
this is because it's so connected to, I mean, I could go off on a right tangent here, but this is where it's connected to existential security. So the reason why places like the Nordic countries have the least amount of religiosity is because they've got a really fit for purpose welfare system. B, their education is good. C, their quality of life and standard of life is high, the highest in the world, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, when you lose your job, right, the state will help you to pick yourself up and find another job, and you won't be out on the streets type thing. So because you have that existential security, you're not longing for something to comfort you or to sort you out when you're absolutely destitute, and because you aren't going to be absolutely destitute because you have existential security. But if you're talking about living in a favela in like Rio de Janeiro and you lose your job and you've got nothing, it's like you need that comfort. Like, where's my hope? How do I get out of this? And so that's why you see a higher religiosity in war-torn countries, higher religiosity in these socioeconomic, like really destitute areas, and yet in the more secure, more educated areas, you get much lower religiosity.
Yeah.
There you go, anyway.
Direct inverse correlation between the quality of social services and poverty.
Absolutely. Well, as we meander on to the end now, and just thank you, Chindi Chimbalu. Again, I will recommend FRF to others, and thank you because you're a liberal Christian, so that's really interesting, Chindi. Thank you for that. And I guess there's a sense that, well, actually, what would you have to say to that?
Well, we are happy with liberal Christians, and we will help you. There are so many people come to us saying, I don't want to leave Jesus, I don't want to leave the church, but I want to find a church that's LGBT friendly because I'm gay. We will help you find that church. We're not here to make you anything. We'll help you find a Unitarian, a liberal Church of Christ. We'll help you. It's still your decision. We don't drive you to church or anything. So that's brilliant. That's our attitude.
That's a really, really constructive and decent attitude. I really respect that. Thank you for bringing Dr. Ray, JP. No worries, Chindi. Really appreciate that, and thank you so much for your generosity again, mate. Good man. So, Darrel, before we get onto my quickfire questions, I ask my guests, where I just get a little understanding of who you are by quickfire questions you can't have time to think about. Is there anything you felt you haven't said that you would like to say with regard to anything, your books or your work or your plans and projects?
Well, I just say if you're interested in psychology of religion, read The God Virus. If you want to understand better why religion uses sex and sexuality to infect people, look at my book, Sex and God. I think both of them are written from. Whenever I write a book, Johnny, my attitude is I want to write a book that's going to be as viable 5 years from now as it was the day I wrote it. And I will say this, both those books are well over 10 years old and they're just as viable. In fact, I would say the God Virus predicted, not Trump specifically, but predicted that phenomena in a way that I wasn't even expecting at the time. Far worse than I expected. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So
well, check those books out, and of course spread the word, everybody, about RFR for sure. Recovering from religion. So now we're getting on to my quick fire questions. Carrie Ann Krause has been obviously waiting all the time for this. My favorite part of the show. Oh, lol. So Carrie, so my first question for you is a normal one. What's your favorite non-fiction book you've ever read?
Oh gosh, the one that probably surprised me the most was Darwin's Origin of the Species. I had known about it for decades, and I only read it about 15 years ago, and it blew me away. I was shocked because it was such an amazing intellectual piece of work. But I've got many more, but that would probably be
that's really interesting, and it's one that I've always thought I should read, but I don't know that I'll ever get around to read because I just don't have time to read anymore. I'm just too bloody busy, which is a shame because I love reading. I want to invent a machine where it just like books.
Yeah. Well, what Darwin did there was he took some observations and put them together in ways that it was just such a phenomenal display of intellect. I can't even describe how impressed I was there.
Brilliant.
Okay, second question.
Favorite fiction book?
Yeah, it's Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle. I read it about once every 2 years, and I never can get enough of it. I love it.
Someone else, I said a Kurt Vonnegut, but I don't know if it's that one. But interesting.
Yeah, Cat's Cradle. Cat's Cradle is the best political novel. It's the best religious novel. It's the best sex novel. It's got everything.
It's got it all. Brilliant. Well, that's a resounding recommendation there. Okay, favorite movie?
Bull Durham with Kevin Costner and
Is that the baseball movie?
Yeah. I was a baseball pitcher for many years, so I identify very well with that particular movie. So much of it was absolutely true. So much of it was. Yeah, and it's also got religion in it. A lot of religion. Only it's not the kind of religion you think about.
So I was watching a film with one of my twins last night and my partner. And we watched a remake of RoboCop, right? It's a 2014 film. You know RoboCop, where the cop maybe you don't. He gets injured and he gets turned into a kind of half robot, like the cyborg. But when you watch these films after so long of not watching them, and with extra kind of philosophical nouns, you watch these films and go, "Oh, I see what they're doing there. Oh, nice." So like the main doctor in that, he's talking about consciousness and what makes a human human. He's called Dennett. Something like Dennett Northam or something like that. It's like Dr. Dennett, right? Daniel Dennett, and then he's talking about what makes like a personhood and rationality and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, this is just, and then he talks about free will, and you're like, oh, now I'm getting so much out of this. So I just had to pause and then tell my family, like, oh, this is about this, and of course I didn't give a shit. But there you go.
You ruined the whole movie for us.
Yeah. It's like, stop stopping it, Dad. I'm trying to watch this. Like, geez. Yeah. Okay. So if you could see a band or a musician or some kind of musical entity that you've never seen before, dead or alive, who would you watch? Who would you see?
I would want to go watch Toscanini conduct the NBC orchestra.
There you go.
In a Rachmaninoff Second Symphony.
That's very precise, and I love it. Excellent. So, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
Oh, golly! Wow. A superpower. Well, what about just a normal power? I'd love to be a major league pitcher with a great sinker ball, but I don't know if that's a superpower or not.
I'll take that as an answer. Yeah, the ability to be that, brilliant. I could be anything in the world. I just want to be a really good pitcher. Thank you.
I was an average athlete at best, so I always wanted to be better. I never made it.
Okay, well, maybe this next question might speak to that. Do you have any regrets in life?
I've lived a damn good life. There's nothing I would regret. Some mistakes I made, I would look back and say, yeah, I wish I'd done differently, but I think I learned a lot from them. Or I learned enough to make them worthwhile. I don't know how you live without making mistakes. So no, I don't regret. Regret, I think oftentimes is overrated.
Yeah.
I don't regret. I just learn. I like Bismarck's statement. I don't learn. I don't want to learn from my mistakes. I want to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
I like that attitude. So I try my best to do my research, to ask other people. And so you don't make as many mistakes when you do that, or mistakes that, quote, you might regret.
You say it reminds me of one of my twins. I mentioned again, like I don't think he's ever made a mistake, or at least not according to him. It's always somebody else's fault. Oh yeah, right, yeah.
Oh no. If I'm blaming somebody else, then I'm really fucked up. No, that's not the right answer. I will take
No, I know it's not. Believe you me, it's the bane of my life. But there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, you're just about to get executed for your heresy. And you're entitled to a last supper. What would it be? What would be your final meal?
My final meal, I would rather. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not. Okay, I don't know. Probably a good Kansas City steak.
He's going to his roots.
Yep. Kansas City steak. Yep.
I remember the days in Wichita where I used to get. So. A final question, Darrel. You are just about to, and this is where I get to spam one of my books. No, I don't, because I can't find them. There, here it is. So this is where you are just about to get your face eaten off by one of the zombies in Survival of the Fittest Metamorphosis, and you just, oh my goodness, right, I'm going to run down to my bunker that I've got prepared, because you're a super prepper and you prepared your bunker, and you can take 3 people dead or alive with you to spend a month with you in the bunker. Which 3 people would you take to hang out with for a month? And it can't be friends or family.
Wow. I think it'd be fun to just have a one-on-one time with Bertrand Russell. I really enjoy what I know of him. 3 people. Wow.
So Bertrand Russell.
For some reason, Bette Midler. I think she'd be fun.
Bette Midler.
For
I think she would.
A whole month, I'd probably take Bette Midler. And who else? A third person. I don't know. Daniel Dennett. I really like him. It'd be fun to. Of course,
I mean, you got to have your granddad there. Good old Daniel Dennett.
No, yeah, he and Bertrand Russell. That'd be fun to watch the 2 of them.
Yeah, they'll be. I always think you need people to disagree. So I'd have like William Lane Craig, Rabbi Tobias Singer, Richard Carrier, or something like that. It's like, right, let's sit back and get the popcorn.
I've had Richard Carrier at my house several times. I enjoy him a lot, but I wouldn't want to torture him with Lane Craig at all. I did have. Have you got time for a quick story?
Yeah, of course.
I was in London getting ready to give a talk on my book, The God Virus, in 2010, I believe it was. And I was at the South Street Ethical Society, and they had standing room only. It was a very good crowd that day. In fact, they said it was one of the better crowds they'd had recently. So I was happy and honored by that. But I'm standing in the wings of the stage, and this guy who's going to introduce me in a minute is just chatting with me. And he says, out there on the podium, Bertrand Russell used to lecture from that very podium. And I'm thinking, oh, shit. I had no idea. And I'm going to go out there in a minute and try to compete with that.
Bertrand Russell, who's he? Anyway, Darrel Ray's in town.
Well, so I've had the honor of lecturing from the same lectern that Bertrand Russell lectured
that's
from.
good.
One of my claims to fame in life.
One of your many. Well, look, thank you so much for gracing this virtual space with your company. I've really enjoyed this chat. Or I wish you personally, but the RFR, the greatest of success, in the forthcoming years. It sounds like, and I've gathered this from both you and Gail Jordan, that you are doing sterling work, and it's really important work that so many people need. Hence, it's the fact that it's growing. So well done for what it's worth. Well done, and long may it continue. Although in some sense, long may it not continue, because it would be great if we didn't have the need for it. But since we will be having the need for it in the foreseeable future, what a valuable service you provide. Do you have any parting words?
No, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed the opportunity just to chat. It's very comfortable. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. In the meantime, everybody else, Merry Christmas, winter solstice, Saturnalia, anything, whatever you like, just Yule tide time, I don't know. Have fun over the coming weeks. I don't know how much stuff I'm going to put out content-wise in next week, because, children and family, they get in the way of like talking bollocks on the internet. So sorry about that. But take care, everybody. It's really good to have the chat and a live chat, and thank you so much to all of you who support. I really appreciate that. Thank you to all my members, and toodle pips to you all, and thanks again to Dr. Darrel Ray. Please spread the word of RFR. It's so important. Do that, and the universe will shine on you or something.
Good night.